No matter how loud the outside noise gets, there's still a game that needs to be played on Sunday. We break down Raiders and Broncos next for Thursday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, October 3rd, 2024.
You are Locked On Raiders, your daily Las Vegas Raiders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts to get the latest edition of the show as soon as it becomes available. And as always, you're checking us out on YouTube. You know, we appreciate that. The show continues to grow each and every day, and that's because of your support and because of the job that my man Ari does in the back end, making sure that we're looking good and sounding good each and every day. And we're on YouTube, so we shout him out. We appreciate him. He's on Twitter at Ari Producers. You can hit him up. You can hit me up as well at your boy Q254. And we got the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line at 707-654-4693. There's no calls or texts coming up on today's show. It is all about the Raiders. It is all about the Broncos. We like to call it the Crossover Thursday. That's when we talk about the biggest storylines offensively and defensively for both teams. Then we give you keys to victory. So what happens is Sayre Bedinger from Locked On Broncos, he's part of the show. Cody Rourke is the other host of the show. But Sayre is the one who's going to join me on the show today. We're going to talk all things Broncos and Raiders. Again, Crossover Thursday, one of my favorite shows of the week. Get you prepared for another game and let you know another game is right around the corner, and it is right around the corner coming up on Sunday. We'll jump right into part one of our conversation after I tell you about the title sponsor of the show, which is PrizePicks. Download the app, use promo code LOCKEDONNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. So, with all that being said, let's go ahead and jump into part one of the crossover edition. Sayre Bedinger, Locked On Broncos, myself, Locked On Raiders. We're talking all things Raiders, biggest storylines offensively. And look, on Wednesday, we met with Antonio Pierce. We know all the drama that's going on with Davante Adams, and he said the best thing: we're on to Denver. We're on to Denver. We're on to Denver. And he let everyone in that locker room know. And I got to talk to a couple people in the locker room on Wednesday, and they are all on to Denver. So I think that that's the only approach you can take. There's a lot of football left to be played, including this upcoming Sunday versus Denver Broncos. So here's part one of the conversation where we're talking all things biggest offensive and defensive storylines for the Silver and Black. Sayre Bedinger and myself from Locked On Broncos and Locked On Raiders. Here we go.
Q. First of all, how you doing? Hope everything's well with you, and looking forward to talking about this matchup, breaking down a lot of the story. I mean, everybody's hearing about the Las Vegas Raiders these days. So how you doing? And let us know what's going on with the Raiders right now.
Yeah, man, I'm excited to talk about the game, right? Because there's so much that's going on with the Raiders. As you mentioned, they're in the conversation. They're in the news for all the, I don't want to say wrong reasons, but just for, non-football reasons, which have to go back with Davante Adams and him saying that he prefers to be traded from the Silver and Black, something that we've heard so much, leading up to even the start of this season. We heard rumblings of it last season, and it never came to fruition. Davante always maintains that he's very happy with the team and wants to be there. And now times have changed, and he said he prefers not to be traded. So, okay, now the Raiders have to handle their business and figure out what's good for them. But, as Antonio Pierce told us on Wednesday, it's on to Denver. Like, that's all they can do. He owes it to the 53 guys in that locker room, the guys upstairs, the front office. He owes it to them to have this team prepared to take on the Denver Broncos. And, again, the Raiders have had a lot of success over Denver, but that doesn't mean they're going to have success forever. They go into Denver and are unprepared, they're going to be embarrassed and get a big fat L, right? And so this is a tough team that the Raiders have to go try to take on in the Broncos. We know this. We know Sean Payton is a really good coach, and we know that they're on, the Broncos, as you know, are on the 2-game winning streak. So there's a lot to like for this game and this matchup, an AFC West division rivalry. So, I'm just excited about the opportunity to see what this is going to look like coming up on Sunday.
Well, and we've seen with the Raiders, I mean, you date back to last year, obviously, the way they kind of closed out the season and how Antonio Pierce won that job in the first place. And now this year, I mean, a road win against the Baltimore Ravens, and then you go and beat the Cleveland Browns last week. So let's talk offensively for the Raiders, with or without Davante Adams. I mean, what is the big storyline for this group going into this Week 5 matchup in Denver?
It's just still trying to find themselves, right? I mean, I think that they did a better job against Cleveland, being able to find some sort of identity, but it hasn't been anything consistent. And that's been the big question and my big, thought on this as the season's gone on. Who are they going to be consistently? What are they going to do really well that they can continue to lean on and do? Antonio Pierce told us when the season started, the run game is so critical. Well, they hadn't been able to run at all. And then last week, they went over 150 yards on the ground. They used some wide receivers and jet sweeps and reverses, guys with speed getting to the edges. And it opened things up, I felt like, in the middle of the field for their running backs. But can they do that consistently? See that they haven't done anything. It's been a big roller coaster so far through 4 games. So, this is why I want to see what it looks like on Sunday to see if what we saw against the Browns can have a trickle over effect and go up against the Broncos. Can Gardner Minshew get, Brock Bowers involved, Jacoby Myers involved, Trey Tucker deep he's got the speed, DJ Turner, can all these guys get involved? With no Devontae Adams, it's you got to spread the ball around the yard. You got to get it to your playmakers. They have plenty of playmakers, but can they get it to them consistently? So that's going to be their biggest challenge offensively. It always is going to start up front with the offensive line. And as the Raiders watch the film from the Broncos and Jets, the Broncos are going to try to get after the quarterback, right? They're going to get after him. They're going to really put strain and stress on the Raiders offensive line. Can they hold up? Can Gardner Minshew stay upright? Or is he going to be running for his life? If he's running for his life, it's probably going to be a long day at the office. But if the offensive line could do their job and hold up and give him opportunity to get the ball out of his hands, it could be a good day for the Raiders. But again, that's going to be the challenge. That's going to be the chess match, I really should say, inside the challenge for Sunday looking at this game.
Well, you said getting after the quarterback is going to be crucial for the Denver Broncos. And this game, Q, it's not being played on Friday the 13th, but Max Crosby is something of a Freddy Krueger for the Denver Broncos. I mean, these guys, they don't get any sleep the night before they play the Raiders, knowing that Crosby is typically going to play. But obviously, I think he even said on his podcast recently that this game against Cleveland was maybe the first that he can remember missing due to injury. Yep. The guy is just crazy. He's so much fun to watch when they're not playing the Broncos. Right. But is he going to play this week? And is that the top storyline for the Raiders defense right now?
I would say it is the biggest storyline, at least for me, in this Raiders defense is number 98 going to be out there. Now, he did not practice on Wednesday. He's also a guy that I don't feel like has to practice on Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday to be able to go. I mean, he's a guy that's played when he was doubtful and still played. But look, he missed last week. That was the first time in his pro career he's missed a game. He's dealing with a high ankle sprain. The only way that that's going to get better is rest. So it's funny. On Wednesday, I was asking another beat writer that covers the Raiders. I said, hey, what do you think about Max for Sunday? My gut feeling tells me he doesn't play. And he said, oh, my gut feeling tells me he will play based off what he said on the podcast. And seeing him walk around the locker room didn't look like he had a limp or anything. So I guess anyone's guess is the right guess. I again, gut feeling tells me that he's not going to play just because he's dealing with that high ankle sprain. But I know Max Crosby wants to be out there with his guys. And if he's not, they got to step up like they did last week, right? Charles Snowden stepped, Christian Wilkins. They spent a lot of money on him in free agency to bring in the big defensive tackle. He stepped up. Tyree Wilson, their former number 7 overall pick from a year ago, had his best day as a pro last week. So there's other guys that they have. They're not 98, and they're, as Antonio Pierce said, you don't need to be 98. You just need to be the best version of yourself. So that's what the Raiders got last week against Cleveland, albeit they're dealing with a banged-up offensive line, so there's a little bit to do with that there. 98, you want to have him out there, but there's no guarantee that he will because he's dealing with that high ankle sprain.
Well, to your point about the Raiders keeping the pass rush going, I mean, these two teams, the Broncos and the Raiders, tied for 3rd in the NFL, according to Sharp Football Analysis, 64% pass rush win rate going into this Week 5 matchup. So these two teams, they're getting after the quarterback, and they've won a couple of games, I would say, as a result of that. And for the Denver Broncos, Q, it's going to be interesting to see how they combat that on the offensive side of the ball, where, like I said, Bo Nix is looking to make some history here in his 5th NFL start.
So there's part 1 of the crossover edition, talking all things silver and black, biggest storylines offensively and defensively. Coming up in segment number 2, you can understand we're going to flip the script. We're going to talk all things Denver Broncos, the biggest storylines offensively and defensively. What do they do really well? What do they need to improve on? How can they butter their bread? That's coming up in segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. We'll get into that after I tell you about one of our great sponsors, which is Gametime. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks. It makes getting tickets to your favorite live events even easier. I always focus on games because, well, we're here talking sports, right? So I always focus in on games. But it could be concerts. It could be comedy shows. It could be movies. It could be whatever you need it to be. Anything that you can get a ticket to, Game Time has you covered. And with Game Time picks, it filters out all the fluff. So it shows you only the incredible deals on the great seats, so you don't have to waste time going through a whole bunch of tickets. Just what you need, what you want to focus in on, boom. That's what they have for you. I always tell you that one of my favorite features that they have is the fact that you can actually see the seats before you buy them. The seats view before you buy them is great. You get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you actually buy your ticket. So no matter what event it is you're going to, you know what that seat looks like. You know what the surrounding areas look like as well, because that could be important too. I always like to know how many people I'm going to have around me. You know, what's it looking like? Where am I setting myself up for? Am I setting myself up for success or for failure? Well, with Game Time, you'll know the answers to that question. Right now, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the app, create an account, use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Again, download the Game Time app, use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL. It's all one word, LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Time to jump into part 2 of the conversation, the crossover edition on this Thursday. I know a lot of folks, this is their favorite show of the week for many good reasons because, well, it gets you prepared for Sunday's game. I know I get fired up. I love to be able to, pick the brain of the other Locked On hosts, whatever team it may be. This week, it happens to be the Denver Broncos. So in segment number 1, you heard the conversation all about the Raiders. We know a lot about the Raiders. Of course, on Friday, I'll give you the just individual keys to victory, how I think that the Raiders can go to Denver and pick up the dub. But right now, we're comparing and contrasting the Raiders and the Broncos. So here in segment number 2, we'll talk all things Denver Broncos, biggest storylines offensively and defensively. Q Myers, of course, myself, Locked On Raiders, and Sayre Bedinger, Locked On Broncos. Let's jump into part 2 of that conversation.
Q, let's talk about some of these top storylines for the Denver Broncos. I mean, obviously, Bo Nix is everybody wants to know, like, what's the story on Bo Nix every week when we do the crossovers. I think he's kind of the top storyline offensively for the Broncos this week after we saw against the New York Jets. I mean, the 60 passing yards. Of course, every statistic has a story behind it, but the storyline is, can the Denver Broncos get Bo Nix going again? We saw him kind of slinging it out there against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers a couple weeks ago. Then you get the rainy conditions against the New York Jets, where both Bo and Aaron Rodgers, they were dirting a few balls, and it was tough going out there. It's tough for those guys to hold on to the football, tough for the receivers to get out of their breaks. So you can make excuses all day. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you got to make some throws, and Bo Nix has to be a little bit more accurate on some deep shots that he's taking. But you know what? I feel confident about what we saw in the second half of that game, Q. Going up against this Raiders pass rush, though, will be a test because Bo hasn't been sacked since week 2 against the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's definitely interesting. A little nugget right there on Bo Nix. And of course, with Denver going out and getting their guy, drafting their guy to be their franchise quarterback, we heard a lot of glowing reviews about him in preseason. And we know how the NFL is. Preseason is one animal. The NFL is another animal. So just kind of interested in seeing his evolution, right? How he evolves into a franchise quarterback and fitting in with what Sean Payton wants to do. What has it that you've been able to identify when it comes to Bo Nix as his specialty, like what he does best so far early in his young career?
I think really getting rid of the ball quickly, not taking sacks because he hasn't taken many, and then also just kind of operating the offense with some confidence out there. That was the big question is, you start all these 60 plus games at the college level. Can you come in and execute an NFL offense, especially one that's known for being so complicated like Sean Payton's? But he seems to be out there operating with the utmost confidence. They're running design quarterback, running plays. I don't know that they're giving him full autonomy at the line of scrimmage just yet, but obviously that's another strength of his, is kind of seeing what the defense is giving and maybe checking into a certain play. So it's been encouraging overall to start this season to see how he has gone from week 1 against Seattle, where, man, I think he was just hoping to complete pass after pass and get the ball out, just make a completion, don't make a mistake. But he's made some mistakes and he's learned from those mistakes. And I think that's what I like the most about him, is just the composure and the confidence that he's been showing.
Yeah, no, that's a good thing, right? And that's a good starting spot for a rookie quarterback. And you mentioned that he hasn't been, sacked since the Steelers game, and that's a very impressive stat. So is that more Bo Nix? Is that the offensive line? Is that a combination of the two? Kind of what's the status of the O-line right now going into this game on Sunday?
It's been really interesting because Mike McGlinchey went down during that Pittsburgh Steelers game, the starting right tackle, the big money guy out there. And he was replaced by 2023 undrafted free agent Alex Palczewski, who's kind of been one of the main topics of discussion over at Locked On Broncos, because Palczewski, I think he even got a 3-minute Baldy breakdown. If anybody wants to go look that up on Twitter or X or whatever. Yeah. It was an impressive game for him against the Jets, and he did a great job against the Bucks as well. But even in just that first game sample, you're kind of like, all right, was this legit, or was it just one game? Then he comes back and does it the next week against the Jets, and it's not like the Broncos are throwing Adam Troutman right next to him every single play, or throwing Matt Parrott, the sixth guy on the offensive line, next to him every play. He's out there getting it done by himself and running combo blocks with Quinn Miners and things like that. So the O-line, especially, I would say, over the last 2 weeks, has really shown strides, not just pass protection, but run blocking as well.
Okay, nice. Well, I know that the run game is so important. I mean, I feel like across the league, if you look, there's the run game has been almost like more important this year than it has in quite a while. And so, focus in on that running game. How big of an emphasis has that been so far for Denver, and what are your kind of expectations? Because the Raiders have been struggling. Last week was their first week that they didn't allow 100-yard rushers. So that's been the Achilles heel of their defense. How much of a lean do you think that the Broncos will have on that run game?
I think they're going to try to lean a little bit more heavily on it now that Javonte Williams has kind of had the breakout game. I mean, Javonte, up until last week, had gone 13 straight games, not averaging at least 4 yards a carry. So under 4 yards a carry for 13 straight games for Javonte, dating back to last season, which was rough to see. I mean, he came back so quick from that major knee injury that he suffered against the Raiders early in the 2022 season. And we were all excited about that, but we just haven't seen that Javonte that, was dragging defenders with him and breaking a lot of tackles, creating yardage after contact. He's kind of become more of, what we had got last year from Samaje Perine as the pass protector, the third down outlet type of guy. He kind of became more of that until the Jets game, where, I mean, man, we saw that guy, the 2021 Javonte, who was dragging defenders and creating yardage after contact. So his game against the Jets was one of the most encouraging, I would say, from the Broncos rushing perspective of the year, just after Sayre Bedinger went out and had 70 yards on 9 carries against the Bucks. So the Broncos running game was absolutely trash the first 2 weeks. And then these last 2 weeks, they've kind of got a little bit something going. So we'll see if they can keep that going against the Las Vegas Raiders. Defensively for the Denver Broncos in this game, Q, it's been really I don't even know if there's words to describe how shocked everybody is by what Vance Joseph has been doing out there, because Vance Joseph, you'll remember, was public enemy number one in Denver for a couple of years. Now he's looking like he might be one of the best defensive coordinators in the league. We mentioned the pass rush win rate earlier. The Broncos have had 86 total pressures in their first 4 games this season. He is dialing it up with everybody. If whether or not Vance Joseph can keep that pass rush red hot is probably the top storyline for the Denver Broncos this week.
Well, I'll tell you what, if the pass rushers are getting to the quarterback, that means everyone on the back end is having an easier job, right? There's nothing that's easy in the NFL, but we know how it goes. With the defensive line being able to get to the QB, it rushes up the process. It makes the job on the back end, the secondary, and the safeties. So we know Pat Surtain. We've seen some plays on the highlights, the last couple of weeks, some interceptions, some, big plays, some big pass breakups. How has the secondary been? Obviously, Surtain is the guy.
He's the man. I mean, you watch him play. I got the privilege of watching Champ Bailey play, and it reminds me very much of that, where you're just watching somebody completely shut down an entire side of the field, and you have that confidence going into every week that no matter what receiver you're going up against, that Surtain is going to be able to get his job done. The big question mark going into this year was, who the heck is going to play opposite him? Because the Broncos didn't have anybody last year that could fill that role. And this year it has been Riley Moss. And Q, I don't know if you know this about me, I'm a big Iowa Hawkeyes guy. So I got to watch Riley go from being a walk-on to being one of the best players for Phil Parker's defense there at Iowa. He didn't get to play last year. much defensively, but he has been awesome this season. He's had a few penalties. He's gotten a little sloppy at times, but the guy is physical. He's confident. He's got those qualities. And I hope you get to see that this week, and not necessarily just in terms of, wow, he's really dominating the receiver that he's going up against, but just the guy that's growing in his game in year 2 and really kind of emerging as that cornerback too. And him and Jaquan McMillan at the nickel spot. I mean, that secondary has been really good through the first 4 games of this season.
What about the deep ball? Has there been some big plays that have been given up by the Broncos defense? How have they been kind of defending the deep pass?
The biggest issue with the deep balls has been penalties, and the Broncos getting caught, whether they're not looking back to the ball, things like that. I mean, Pat Surtain was called for a couple. Riley Moss has been called for some. I think even Jaquan has been called for 1 or 2. So it's really been those guys, though. You would think no Justin Simmons for this matchup because you would think that the safety position would be the liability. But it's been more so the corners getting penalized, and the safety spot with PJ Locke and Brandon Jones, the free agent signing from the Miami Dolphins. Brandon Jones has forced 3 turnovers in the last 2 games. So he's been very good, and he's been exactly what the Broncos paid for. So certainly that secondary has come together where there were so many question marks. Brandon didn't even hardly practice in the offseason. He was injured for most of it, and he's been great. So to see those guys coming together after the losses, especially of a guy like Simmons, has been really encouraging.
There you go. Well, that's a good breakdown right there. The Broncos defense, I'm looking forward to the chess match that is, the Raiders offense, Broncos defense, and vice versa, right? The Raiders defense and the Broncos offense, and see how it all plays out. Another, again, AFC West divisional matchup, a divisional rivalry. This time it's in Denver. So, and we look forward to these twice a year. So that's great detail right there. On the Broncos in general. I guess we should talk about what's it going to take for both teams to come away with the dub.
What's it going to take for these 2 teams to come away with a win, get to 3-2, and keep pace with the unfortunately undefeated Kansas City Chiefs up to this point?
There we go. Part 2 of the conversation, crossover edition. Sayre went there with all the Broncos offense, defense, biggest storylines, what they're doing well, who's shining right now. I think that was a really good, detailed, conversation about the Denver Broncos. I think they gave you a really good idea of where they're trying to hang their hats, what they're trying to, butter their bread with, and sounds like it's trending in the right direction. And really with that Broncos offensive line, right, protecting Bo Nix, hasn't been sacked since week 2 against the Pittsburgh Steelers. So to me, I think that's a big deal and a big challenge for the Silver and Black coming up on Sunday in Denver on the road. One of these 2 teams is going to improve to 3-2 overall. One of these 2 teams will drop to 2-3. Will it be the Raiders or will it be the Broncos? Coming up in segment number 3, we'll give you the keys to victory for both teams. We'll do that after I tell you about another great sponsor we have here on the Locked On Raiders podcast, which is FanDuel. NFL fans, get into the season. It's only week 5, so get into the season. Jump on the FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, if you want to bet on the Raiders and the Broncos are actually 2.5-point favorites right now. And, of course, normally you get about 3 points when you're at home. So, basically, it's a pick-'em game. The books does not think that this game is going to be very high scoring. That is not surprising, especially after the fact that the Broncos are coming off a 10-9 victory over the Jets a week ago. And we saw what the Raiders did, putting up 20 points against the Cleveland Browns. So, not expecting fireworks when it comes to offense, but if you have a hunch in the middle of the game, maybe it's trending in a different direction. Maybe the Raiders are all of a sudden scoring a lot of points. They're having one of their big days in Denver. Well, you can hop on. You can place a bet. You'll be good to go. You can check out the latest stats. You can view play-by-play, live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page that you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. All you got to do is go to FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. We got to close this bad boy out strong. Crossover Thursday edition. We talked about the biggest storylines offensively and defensively for the Raiders. We did the same thing for the Broncos. Now, how does each team come up with the dub and improve to 3-2 overall? That's what we're doing here in segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Sayre Bedinger and myself, Broncos, Raiders, keys to victory. Let's jump right into it right now.
it's one of those talking points that came up a lot over the offseason as everybody's doing their offseason victory laps. Every team's undefeated, right? The Raiders undefeated against the Broncos since late in 2019. It's been a rough streak against this team for the Broncos. So in order for the Raiders to get to their 9th straight win against Denver, what's got to happen?
Well, I'll start with the offense. Offensively, they've got to find out their identity. They've got to establish who they're going to be. Again, without Devontae Adams, they've got other guys there. They've got Jacoby Myers, who's a really good wide receiver. Brock Bowers is a hot shot rookie. How are you going to get those guys involved? How are you going to get them to be a focal point of the offense? And what kind of version of the run game are we going to see, right? There has to be, for this Luke Getsy offense to work. And I'm still not 100% convinced that Luke Getsy's offense is going to work, right? Let me be 100% honest with that. There's still, the jury's still out on Luke Getsy as an OC and a play caller. Can he be that guy? But I do know for this offense to go, the run game has to be there. It has to be present. Last week, it was the best version of it at 152 yards on 29 carries. That's how the Raiders want to butter their bread. They want to be able to have that run game. So can they do that? And that allows Gardner Minshew to not feel like the game is on him and he's got to do everything, right? You want him to have less than 30 passes in a game if possible. And so he had that last week against Cleveland. The Raiders found a way to win. Can they go back to the run game? Have they figured it out? Like what works for them? That's what we want to see. Is it something that they can sustain, or was that a one-off thing? So far, this Raiders season has been it's been like you're at the roller coaster, or you're on the amusement park, right? It's just a big roller coaster ride. They can't be that. They've got to be steady Eddie. Who can they, rely on? Who can they, say that, okay, this is how this team is going to go. That's the biggest question offensively, is who can they be consistently, and can they find that success on a Sunday against the Denver Broncos defense that's really good and really stout up front, that can get to the quarterback? Can that offensive line, can they protect Minshew? Can they open up some holes in the running game? That's that's going to be one of the big keys. Can they find that consistent offense? Defensively, they got to make life miserable for Bo Nix. They've got to, as you mentioned, he hasn't been sacked since the Steelers game. That's quite a while. They've got to get familiar with Bo Nix. He's a rookie. They've got to introduce themselves, whether it's Max Crosby or not. Christian Wilkins, Tyree Wilson, Janarius Robinson. He's got to show Charles Snowden, these guys. And I know everyone's not a household name, but they've got to make themselves a household name. They've got to get to the quarterback. They've got to get to that win rate. Obviously the Broncos and the Raiders are both really good at that. They've got to get back to that. If they can do that and show that pressure that they've been doing, pretty much all season long, then it makes, the corner's job a little bit easier. It makes the safety's job a little bit easier. Jacorian Bennett, he's a name to watch. He's not Pat Surtain, but he's playing really good ball at the cornerback position. Really a lot of pass breakups on third down as well. Something to definitely pay attention to. He's number 0. You can't miss him. The no-fly zone, according to his jersey number. So we'll see if he's able to have that success out there. He's playing with a lot of confidence. Jack Jones on the other side, he's a playmaker. I always say that the Raiders need to come up with a couple turnovers just to give their offense a shorter field. I think that kind of goes without saying, but they've got to be able to slow down the run. Not allow that 100-yard rusher or combined rushing, whatever the case may be. They've got to be able to, consistently slow that down. And last week was the first time they've done that. So there's a lot of questions with this team offensively and defensively. They've got the parts in place to make it happen. But again, it goes back to the C word. Can they do it consistently? That's kind of the MO for the Raiders. And that's what the MO's really been all season long. For Denver, to get their victory and improve to 3-2 overall on the season, what has to happen?
Well, I think number 1, they got to get Bo Nix going again. Number 2, like we just talked about, keep the pass rush heat on. And number 3, keep Javonte Williams rolling. And let's start kind of breaking it down there. Javonte, like I said, had been horrible dating back to last year. He was averaging 2.2 yards a carry going into last week's game against the New York Jets. Didn't look like himself. Didn't even look like, man, when Audric Estime gets activated off IR, are they even going to keep Javonte Williams? It was that bad. So to see him have a sort of re-breakout game after the knee injury in 2022, it was awesome for the Denver Broncos to see. So can you keep that going? And for Bo Nix, getting him going again, we saw against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I mean, just hitting downfield shots, being accurate on the mid-range throws, getting rid of the ball quickly, making great decisions as a runner. And I think that's something that's really been key for him in getting that momentum as a passer, oddly enough, is really, hey, when you break the pocket and when you get out and you make a play with your legs, it kind of just feels like something just clicks with Bo, where he's able to kind of start getting a rhythm passing. So can they keep getting him going after the second half against the Jets, where he started to hit some downfield throws through his first touchdown pass of the season to Cortland Sutton? But really, this Denver Broncos team, I don't know that I can necessarily say after just 4 games, but live and die by the pass rush. I mean, these guys are getting after the quarterback, and they're forcing teams to have to throw a lot. You talked about that with the Raiders. Like, you don't want Gardner throwing 30 plus times in the game. Right. That's what the Broncos absolutely want him to do. So it plays perfectly the keys to victory on both sides, because Vance Joseph and that defensive front, they are knocking guys back every down. And they forced Breece Hall had 10 carries for 4 yards last week against the Jets. They have been dominating up front defensively. And so that's not to say that it can't change though in 1 week, because we've seen the Broncos get susceptible against Kenneth Walker and the Seahawks in week 1. They gave up a number of big chunk plays. They've had problems with penalties deep downfield. So there's things like that pop up every so often, but can you maintain that level of physicality and force the ball into Gardner's hands so that you can let that pass rush feast and let Vance Joseph keep on cooking up these different pass rush schemes that he's been doing? So it should be an exciting matchup on Sunday, Q. I know these two teams, they're trying to keep pace right now with the Kansas City Chiefs in the AFC West. The Chiefs, I mean, I said it jokingly earlier, but man, they just seem to find a way to win these games. It doesn't matter if it's 17 points against the Chargers or if they got to score 35 against whoever, they seem to be able to figure it out. So these two AFC West teams got to figure it out and get these wins early in the season to do what they can to keep pace in the division. And we'll find out more about the identity of both of these teams as they continue to go along. As Q's talking about, the Raiders seeking their identity on offense, the Broncos kind of trying to find any sort of groove that they can, buying into the Bo Nix experience. We will see what happens.
There it is. There it was. The keys to victory for both teams. Of course, coming up tomorrow on Friday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, as we close out this week really strong and head into the weekend, we'll, of course, break down the keys to victory, what I'm looking at, who I'm looking at to be big-time difference makers, especially with the fact that the Raiders have a very long laundry list of injured guys. So I look forward to seeing the injury report today, see if a little bit more of that's getting cleaned up. Of course, we'll talk about it in great detail, and we'll give you all the news and notes. We'll get back to the calls and texts. Again, we'll close out the week really strong, send you into the weekend the right way, getting you prepared for Raiders Broncos week 5. The Raiders have a 8-game winning streak. They're trying to go for 9 in a row against Denver. Eventually they'll get snapped. Hopefully it does not get snapped on Sunday. But again, we'll talk about it coming up on tomorrow's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast as we close out the week really, really strong. Until then, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.